You are welcome once again to OwanaPaedia, the one-stop center for Uganda's history and the history of the rest of the world. The name is Tony Geoffrey Owana, and taking aim at me behind there is the son of the late Corporal Matovu Samuel, our NRA-UPDF warrior who fell some years back. And Semian at times thinks that I'm now his father, but a DNA test will sort that out. We are still in lockdown, although some of you are beginning to tempt the devil simply because COVID has not yet bereaved you. We at OwanaPaedia want to assure you of one thing. As long as there's a danger, let us stay in Yoweri's ark until COVID floods clear out. If you joke with COVID, COVID will joke with you, and it will have the last laugh. Semiano insists that we have to thank you for the overwhelming attention you paid to our tribute to General Kasirye Bwanga. Indeed, that was tremendous. And we have taken note of your requests. Many of you are requesting that we cover some of the people you know who have gone the way of all flesh. Some of your orders are quite tall orders, but OwanaPaedia will go the extra mile to try to effect what you are asking for. As the lockdown bites, some of us are living on Toke products, which are the baby of Professor Florence Isabire Muranga of the Presidential Initiative on Banana Industrial Development, Toke. Let me warn the Toke people that all the subscribers on OwanaPaedia are saying that they don't see Toke products in their supermarkets. However, they confirm that they see Uzima Water, a product of the Uganda People's Defense Forces arm of business, which is called the National Enterprises Corporation. So, from OwanaPaedia to Professor Reverend Muranga, Toke is not being seen in many supermarkets.
The economy of Uganda has been troubled for the last 15 years by economic mismanagement. During the 1970s, it was not even possible to assess the extent of this mismanagement in statistical terms, because the entire administrative system had almost ceased to function. Even when the military government was overthrown in 1979, the economy could not recover because of the insecurity that prevailed.
This brings us now to a very serious issue affecting almost all of us today, and it is money matters. Uganda's 2021 budget was presented a few days ago, and up to now, tongues are still wagging. In order to appreciate where we have been and to project where we might be going, OwanaPaedia wants to bring you the 1986 budget, which was presented on 23rd August 1986. And on the basis of the information contained in that, you'll be able to make a sober judgment of how things have moved since then. Remember, on 23rd August 1986, the NRM government was barely 7 months in government. Uganda television star reporter Charles Willie Ochola was on hand to broadcast that budget speech live to a population of 15 million people who had only 90,000 TV sets and 600,000 radio sets. You can work out the mathematics and see how well or how badly we are doing. It's our sincere hope at OwanaPaedia that Charles Willie Ochola, who is still alive, is able to watch this. This was his work and the work of Uganda television. Outside Parliament House, whose appearance really tells the story. Just look at it, what Parliament was looking like in 86. Charles Willie Ochola unveils what transpired during budget speech.
Viewers, good evening. Saturday, the 23rd of August 1986, is the National Budget Day for the Republic of Uganda. And the budget, as has been of tradition, is always presented in the National Assembly, which is the Uganda's seat of democracy. This budget of today is going to be presented by the Minister of Finance, Professor Mulema. For the period of 86-87, the budget will try to make the proposals that are intended to achieve a gradual adjustment of the economy. This is paramount because the National Resistance Government have got a policy of following up an economic strategy of a mixed economy. That is to say, the use of a mixed economy of state and private sectors, as well as cooperatives with all-round efficiency being the main criterion. This therefore would mean there will be a total rejection of the free enterprises as being practiced by pure capitalists, and the option of over-nationalization as being practiced by the socialist economies. This is in line with the National Resistance Movement's programs of building an independent, integrated and self-sustaining economy. That is program number 5. Under this program, it is intended to redress the general underdevelopment, which is due to entwinement with the economies of the developed countries of the West on an equal basis, whereby the system has been that exporting raw materials cheaply and importing finished goods at exorbitant prices have been the orders of most governments. Professor Mulema, the Minister of Finance, carrying in the 1985-86 budget to the Parliamentary building, where it is going to be read today. Arriving to attend the 1985-86 budget is the President of the Republic of Uganda, Museveni, is received by the Inspector General of Police and the Commander of the Army.
The Inspector General of Police at that time was the late Luke Ofunji, and the Army Commander was today's General Elitu Mwine, who is also the longest serving Member of Parliament in Uganda and currently Minister of Security. And now take special attention to watch Bandmaster and Parade Maestro Venancio Okello and just see how he about hands to salute President Museveni. Venancio Okello has since died, and I tell you up to now there is no one in police who has been able to copy what Okello used to do.
Arrival into the parliamentary buildings, the President.
The post-liberation war parliament was known as the National Resistance Council, and when the war ended, it was composed of just 38 members, including Museveni, who was its speaker and chairperson.
Prayers. Almighty God, who in thine infinite wisdom and providential goodness hast appointed the offices of rulers and councils for the welfare of society and the just government of men, we beseech thee to behold with thine abundant favor these thy servants whom thou hast been pleased to call to the performance of such important trusts in this land. let thy blessing descend upon them here assembled, and grant that they may, as in thy presence, treat and consider all matters that shall come under their deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote thine honor and glory, and to advance the good of those whose interest thou hast committed to their charge. Amen.
Now, when government was composed, the number of members increased, because now we had members from the political parties, DP, UPC, CP, and UPM, and we also had the representatives of the various rebel armies which had fought against Milton Obote and who had been part of President Tito Okello's military council, including FEDEMU, UFM, UNRF, and FUNA. So the size of parliament increased to, it was not 100, it was much less than 100, and that constituted the National Resistance Council. So Professor Mulema presents his speech, and you could see the fan. This Kiwujo fan, which was evidence that either the air conditioner was not working in Parliament, or Parliament had never installed air conditioners. If you go there now, I think the story will be different. You will notice that the sitting arrangement in Parliament does not recognize the old tradition of one side being government and the other one being opposition. All people sitting in the chamber were what was called government. There was no opposition, there was no proposition. But let us allow the speaker, who was none other than Museveni himself, to tell us why.
Before I call on the Minister of Finance to read the budget speech, I have to do a little explanation regarding our existing organs, the movement and the state. In the past, people in Uganda here were linked to a parliamentary system where there was the legislature, and then the executive arm, and then the political organs, the movements and the parties and so on. But as of now, ours are fused. When we were in the bush, we didn't have time to sort out the roles of legislatures as opposed to roles of political organs of the movement. So as of now, they are fused. That's why you see me here acting as a speaker. Because we are not in the decision. So soon they know our speakers. So we didn't provide for it. So you have to bear with us. Minister of Finance,
Minister of Finance, Professor Mulema, reading the 1986-87.
Professor Mulema was the Nrm'S first finance minister. He had been a Democratic Party member of Parliament from Mukono from 1980 to 1985 when Tito Okello overthrew Obote's government. But Mulema had also been a member of Parliament in the 60s, and I think he came to Parliament after only 3 people voted for him in 61 when Uganda boycotted the elections. Mulema came to Parliament with only 3 votes, only 3, and representing the Democratic Party. Again, because Uganda had boycotted. But in 1980, he won a lot of votes and came to represent the same constituency of Mukono. Even at that time, when Obote was in power, and Obote was the Minister of Finance, Professor Mulema was the shadow Minister for Finance in the Democratic Party.
Mr. Chairman, sir, I beg to move that the National Resistance Council do resolve itself into a committee of supply for the consideration and approval of the budgetary proposals for the fiscal year 1986-87, estimates of revenue and expenditure. Mr. Chairman, sir, the economy of Uganda has been troubled for the last 15 years by economic mismanagement. During the 1970s, it was not even possible to assess the extent of this mismanagement in statistical terms, because the entire administrative system had almost ceased to function. Even when the military government was overthrown in 1979, the economy could not recover because of the insecurity that prevailed. Misallocation of national resources and lack of guidance and direction. Mr. Chairman, between 1972 and 1979, the economic conditions forced Ugandans to move away from production to commerce and services, where these were still possible. During this period, therefore, little production for export took place, although production of coffee continued somewhat because of the very nature of the crop, while other exports like cotton suffered from substitution effect as people switched to production of locally consumed commodities whose prices rose steadily in response to the declining value of the shilling. Mr. Chairman, this low level of production, both in agriculture and industry, was reflected in the trends of gross domestic product. It was not, however, possible to get reliable statistics. Such figures as we now have are rough estimates based on a few statistics available and lots of assumptions. Between 1978 and 1980, Mr. Chairman, there was a further marked drop in gross domestic product as a result of the war that was taking place then. And although gross domestic product recovered somewhat between 1980 and 1983, most of the recovery was accounted for by increases in commerce and government services, since even during that time, production remained very low. Rough estimates indicate that real gross domestic product declined by 14% between 1978 and 1980. And while there was a recovery of about 17% between 1980 and 1983, gross domestic product further declined by 10% between 1984 and 1985. During 1985, it is estimated that gross domestic product fell by 5.5%. The monetary economy showed a decline of about 3.9% during the same period, while the non-monetary sector could have declined by up to 8%. Mr. Chairman, it is not possible to get accurate figures for the non-monetary economy in absence of detailed statistics. The decline in this sector could have been moderate or substantial, but it can be assumed that as a result of massive smuggling that was taking place all along our borders, the decline in production in the peasant economy could have been more apparent than real. Government is making arrangements to have a crop census followed up with regular periodic reports compiled from down at the parish level to ensure better planning and forecasting in future. Because of political instability and the security situation which existed in 1985, it can reasonably be assumed that output in both agriculture and manufacturing industries, where these were still in operation, was not substantial. Certainly in the industrial sector, the industries did not only lack funds to purchase raw materials and capital inputs, but lacked working capital as well. Prices and the monetary development. Mr. Chairman, There have been very high increases in prices in this country between 1980 and now. The reasons can be analyzed in terms of supply and demand. On the supply side, the economy has faced problems in terms of the distribution of food and the production of manufactured items. Although Uganda has the capacity to produce large quantities of commodities for local consumption and export, we have continued to face transport bottlenecks and absence of appropriate marketing arrangements. In the past 15 years, the problems have been aggravated by conditions of insecurity, mainly created by the behavior of governments in power themselves. This made it difficult for food which could have been produced in large quantities to reach the markets. In the industrial sector, production of goods was always too small to meet domestic demand. The reasons for this are clear. The industries were poorly managed, lacked working capital, and could not even get sufficient foreign exchange for raw material imports and spare parts. The situation was made worse by the financial program approved by the Obote government and supported by the International Monetary Fund. That program was principally aimed at management of demand without doing much about supply. The industrial sector, therefore, either stagnated or some industries simply stopped operations because currency devaluation, which was the principal monetary instrument in this program, made it impossible for industries to operate, since the cost of imported raw materials and spare parts progressively increased without corresponding increases in these industries' working capital. While the financial program adopted concentrated on imports and consumption, this did not substantially affect the internal price levels, because considerable quantities of the consumer goods imported were either smuggled out of the country or foreign currency approved for such goods was diverted to other purposes abroad. The result was that consumer goods such as shoes, bed sheets, blankets, clothes, sugar, soap, and others remained in short supply and therefore attracted very high prices. On the other hand, Mr. Chairman, the financial program failed even in this respect, notwithstanding its main preoccupation with demand management. The governments were not particularly disciplined, and therefore expansion in money supply was rapid, simply to finance unplanned and in many cases irregular government spending. The government deficit therefore continued to widen, and the resultant inflation was particularly damaging to the economy, especially as it was financed by borrowing from the banking system and the Bank of Uganda in particular. In addition to growing government deficits to finance consumption and services, a large proportion of bank credit went to finance commercial activity and speculation. Even where production was possible, credit to finance it was not available in banks because there were more profitable ventures in commerce and speculation for banks to finance. The financial institutions, therefore, ignored agriculture and industry because it did not pay as well. This government is determined to reverse this trend. Mr. Chairman, some of the measures that have been already taken to correct this unhealthy situation include the recent setting up of the Rehabilitation of Productive Enterprises program, which, with the supporting foreign resources supplied by the United States government, will specially finance agriculture and agro-related industries. Before the end of the year, another organization to be known as Uganda Agricultural Finance Agency, UAFA, will be set up with the single objective of financing agriculture. Government is also seriously considering increasing the capital of the Uganda Development Bank, which is the national institution best suited to the financing needs of industry. Mr. Chairman, in the in the monetary field, domestic credit increased sharply between the years 1980 and 1985. The acceleration declined somewhat between 92 and 94, but during the year 1984 and 1985, total domestic credit increased by 130%, from 85 billion shillings to 195.2 billion shillings. This went hand in hand with government indebtedness to the banking system. Net claims on government increased 65% between 1983 and 1984, from shillings 40.5 billion to shillings 66.9 billion, and it increased further to shillings 108.8 billion by the end of 1985. This increase largely reflected government dependence on the banks in on bank financing to cover the widening budgetary deficit. Bank credit to the private sector was also increasing during the same period, but at a lower rate of growth. And this growth in the credit to the private sector went mainly to finance commerce. Money defined as currency in circulation and bank deposits increased by 90% over the year 1985, from 111.5 billion shillings to 211.3 billion shillings, while currency in circulation alone nearly doubled during the same period, from 43.9 billion shillings to 80.7 billion shillings. This large increase in currency in circulation and the money supply in general naturally put a lot of pressure on prices, as these large increases were taking place during a period of low and declining production. Bank credit was also distributed in a manner that reflected the usual effect of inflation in an economy. In agriculture, for example, bank lending stood at 35.3 billion shillings by the middle of 1985 and rose to 48.1 billion by the end of the year. These fairly large increases in the agricultural area are largely explained by financing export crops, and in particular, coffee. Commercial bank credit to agriculture for purposes of production remained virtually non-existent. In a situation of inflation, the attitude of commercial banks can be justified on purely financial grounds. It was more rational for banks to finance sectors where credit was relatively more secure and where it could be recovered in a short period. These were mainly commercial and service ventures. The manufacturing sector received very little credit from banks, especially as most of the industries were bogged down with legal problems stemming from ownership and other problems. Frequent devaluations of the shilling did not help matters either. Mr. Chairman, the policy employed by the previous governments, while aimed at establishing a relatively more acceptable exchange rate for the shilling, had the effect of undermining this very policy. The exchange rate policy was used by the previous governments as an instrument to help in management of demand. The idea was to devalue the shilling and thus make foreign currency more expensive in terms of Uganda shillings and therefore reduce demand for it. Management of demand can only succeed if first there is discipline in how money is spent, not only in government, but also in those institutions which are charged with the management of the financial resources. And where there is a mechanism for channeling resources into productive areas of the economy. What went wrong in Uganda was that budgetary discipline was lacking, and those who advocated a monetary approach to the management of the economy depended on the market mechanism to orient the economy towards more production and less consumption. That, of course, could not happen because of the very internal contradictions inherent in the policy. Mr. Chairman, the government intends to maintain a fixed exchange rate in order to minimize the inflation, but will also take other measures that will help the economy to recover steadily without high rates of inflation. The government has therefore decided that the exchange rate be fixed at shillings 1,400 per United States dollar. With immediate effect, the dual exchange rate regime is abolished. Mr. Chairman, interest rates do play a monetary role as they do regulate the cost and availability of credit and where that credit goes. They also can help in mobilizing financial resources which could be used to achieve desired economic objectives. In a situation of inflation, however, interest rates need to be substantially high in order to attract people to save and also discourage some from speculation through reluctance to hold money or through hoarding and property speculation. High rates of interest, however, can have very damaging effects on an economy. They could discourage borrowing, and in a situation like ours, may have the effect of curtailing production, since production forces the investor to tie money in projects for a relatively long period. If the rates of interest are high, such borrowing may appear, rightly or wrongly, unacceptable to investors. The subject is therefore controversial. Mr. Chairman, it has therefore been decided that as soon as the National Investment Plan is approved, and therefore the desired levels of investment in various sectors of the economy are established, interest rate policy will be reviewed. Financial institutions will be required to adjust their investment portfolios and ensure that predetermined proportions of their lending go to each sector of the economy. At that juncture, it will be possible to reduce interest rates applicable to productive sectors without, at the same time, discouraging lending institutions from lending to these low-interest sectors. The most significant development in the area of monetary policy, Mr. Chairman, to be undertaken during the current fiscal year is the currency reform, which I announced earlier this year. New currency notes are already being manufactured by our security printers. The minting of new coins is also in progress, for we shall definitely go back to the use of cents and shillings coins as a valuable media of exchange. The production of high security currency, however, takes a longer time than most people appear to appreciate. It's only this factor that is delaying the exercise. Trade and the balance of payments. Mr. Chairman, the economic mismanagement of this country this country has experienced in the past has had the effect of narrowing our export base so much that at present, the only export we can seriously talk about is coffee. The country would probably have no export at the moment if coffee were not the type of crop that can survive long periods of neglect. Even then, the volume of coffee exports has been declining in the last 10 years.
That is Professor Ponsiano Serumaga Mulema presenting the Nrm'S budget of 1986-1987. As he has said, at that time, coffee was the only worthy export earner. And he explains that it was only possible to export coffee because it is a crop that can manage to stay around even if it is neglected. This is a brief adjournment because the budget speech is continuing. But have you subscribed to OwanaPaedia? Stand well.